Small gavel, strong sound.
Meeting will come to order. First order of business is roll call.
Senator Ellis. Senator Beitman.
Here.
Senator Salazar. Senator Rothfuss. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown.
Excused.
Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman.
Here.
Representative Newsom. Representative Obermueller.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Yep.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Here.
Chairman Paxton.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Well, good morning and welcome. We have another full day of legislating to do today, it looks like. We've kind of thinned out the herd out there, it looks like a bit. Not as much interest maybe in some of these. Maybe they won't be controversial and we can move right through them, I guess. All right, the first order of business that we have is the BOCES Education Service, and I guess to present the bill, we have Talise Hanson. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Talise Hanson, LSO. I'm presenting Bill Draft 23, LSO 245 on BOCES as local education agencies. This bill draft is a resurrect of 2022 House Bill 50 with some changes that I'll highlight as I walk through the bill draft. Page 1 of the bill draft creates a new statute, 21-20-112, titled Authority to Act as a Local Education Agency. Page 2 starts with subsection A, which states that a BOCES may act as a local education agency for participating school districts to apply for, receive, or administer federal or state grants. The may language allows a BOCES to act as an LEA, but it does not require a BOCES to act as an LEA for the purposes of applying for the grants. Subsection B states that a BOCES may apply for federal or state grants if a BOCES receives the approval of 2 or more of the participating school districts that have expressly agreed to participate in the grant application. The may language allows a BOCES to apply for federal or state grants, but it does not require a BOCES to apply for these grants. The first sentence in subsection B is slightly different from House Bill 50. House Bill 50 stated that a BOCES may apply to the Department of Education for federal or state monies received by the department. This change broadens the grants that a BOCES may apply for because it removes the limitations that a BOCES may apply only for the grants the Department of Education has received. This would allow a BOCES to apply for other grants, including grants that other state agencies have received. However, even though this would allow a BOCES to apply for these grants, it does not mean that the BOCES will be eligible for these grants because eligibility depends on the grant program's specific requirements. Subsection B also states that if a BOCES applies for a federal or state grant, then the participating school districts are not eligible to apply for the same federal or state grant. But if a school district does not participate in the BOCES grant application, they may apply for the same federal or state grants as the BOCES. Subsection C on page 3 requires that the Department of Education treat a BOCES as a local education agency for purposes of this section and allow the BOCES to apply for all federal and state grant monies that they are eligible for. Subsection D allows state agencies to inform BOCES of available federal or state grants. House Bill 50 had a similar sentence at the end of subsection C that stated that the Department of Education may inform BOCES of available federal or state grants. This change allows other state agencies to inform the BOCES of grants that they may be eligible for and does not limit the agencies that can inform BOCES of potential grants to only the Department of Education. Subsection E provides that an eligible grantee may designate a BOCES as the fiscal manager for state or federal grants, but the grantee remains responsible for ensuring the grant requirements are satisfied. Subsection F allows the Department of Education to promulgate rules to establish processes and guidelines for a BOCES to apply for these grants. This is a change from House Bill 50, which stated that the state superintendent of public instruction may promulgate these rules. The staff comment on page 4 highlights that the committee may wish to consider including BOCES that are comprised of both school districts and community college districts, as the bill draft currently only applies to BOCES with school districts. Subsection C on page 4 is a conforming amendment to include the new statute within the meaning of the BOCES Act. Section 3 provides an immediate effective date, and I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, questions or comments from the committee? Yes.
Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And this bill was a bill I brought last session. I didn't run it. I brought it up, but I didn't run it. But basically, it allows these BOCES to apply for federal grants. My question, and I can't remember if it was clear in the draft that I had, but it's clear that these, as an LEA, they're not subject to any block grant funding, right? I mean, that's clear. This is just federal state grants. And so my question is, clear these BOCES as an LEA, they cannot be eligible for block grant money, correct?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I just want the committee to understand that. Thank you.
Okay, other comments or questions from the committee? Yes. Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, my question, I don't know, it may go to Representative Summers, may go to LSO, or anybody else knows. The BOCES that the community colleges participate in, are there any federal grants that such BOCES might want to apply for? Or are those grants all in the special education area where we do not have the community colleges participating?
So, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure the answer to that. I never investigated the whole idea was these special education BOCES that were between school districts to try to help them get federal grants. I haven't evaluated or looked at whether, what the consequences or any of that would be for a BOCES that's with a community college. I'm not opposed to adding that in, but I don't know the consequences or the ability of them to apply for.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the statute that established BOCES in the first place, and it looks like, to me, in 21-2108, powers and duties of the BOCES, number 4 says accept or reject any federal or other gift, grant, bequest, or device. So, not sure, do we need this bill if it's already provided for in statute? And, okay, maybe Representative Summers can answer.
Representative Summers, I believe, has an answer for you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think when the BOCES do their comments, they'll talk about that. But basically, there were federal grants out there and have been federal grants that only LEAs can apply for. And so if you don't have that designation, I think our statutes would have allowed for that, but we have to make those folks an LEA under certain conditions so they can apply for those federal grants.
Okay, anyone else on the committee? Questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this goes to you to this question in terms of where is the local education agency defined? Is that within our statute, or is that a federal designation, or?
Mr. Chairman? Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, I know, and I'd look at Tanya, but I know for a fact that LEA is defined in our statutes. I don't know exactly where it's defined in statute. I'm sure it's also defined in federal, but I know I've seen that definition. But we can maybe get that for you later.
Tanya, do you have that, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'm working on it. 1 second. But
Okay.
to a couple of the questions that have been posed, I think this act clarifies that these BOCES are eligible to apply for federal funds. Then the local education agency sort of name or title is from federal law. I think that is the basis of Representative Summers' bill request on this.
Okay. Anything else from the committee? All right, thank you. Okay, do we have any comments from WEA or WDA, Wyoming Education Department? No, okay. All right, anyone else? Public, yep. Welcome, please introduce yourself.
Chairman, my name is Dan Mayer. I'm Executive Director for Region 5 BOCES, located in Wilson, Wyoming.
I'm Carolyn Connor, Executive Director for Northwest BOCES in Thermopolis.
And we're here to stand for any questions that you may have of us regarding this bill, to answer a few of the questions regarding the post-secondary options. I do believe there may be some funding that may be available to them as I look through federal grants, but again, I think that needs to be evaluated and see the unintended consequences of making that happen, just to respond to that. We are in support of the bill. I think it allows flexibility. I think it puts restrictions in for us not to seek funding that we are not eligible for, and it allows agencies to be I think the final determinant of our eligibility standing. Oftentimes when there's money that comes available and it looks multiple ways, but it's usually federal, state dollars, that when we look at the regulations, what we are often indicated is that we don't have that LEA designation. And as we've talked to other states who have agencies like BOCES, they're called different things. They're called educational service agencies. They're called independent IEUs, educational units in different states. That's what states have done to address that problem for some of that funding. And it looks just differently, but it's a designation. And in the federal rule, as I've testified before, that we can be designated for certain purposes. According to the federal, it's just really up to the states to clarify when, how, what, and those sort of things. I'll be interested to analyze the bill and run scenarios through to see how it would look and if there's any roadblocks as we work through it, but I'm in support and I have no additions or deletions at this point to make comment on.
Okay, any questions or comments from the committee? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's for both of you, just to get an idea of how much money goes through these BOCES. What are your budgets like? How much money do you go through a year? What's that look like?
Well, we're a fee-for-service agency, so it's ever-changing as the population changes, the funding changes. We have to keep the same staff on board all the time. They're specifically trained staff. And just because we're down on student numbers, we can't RIF people because we might have 4 new students coming in at a time, or 1 student. It's been slow over the last few years, and now the placement needs are very high. So staffing is critical. It's that uncertainty. We don't have set budgets because it fluctuates with the enrollment as a fee-for-service agency. We're not eligible for a lot of the funds that the districts get, such as when COVID was going on, we didn't get additional funding. It's just simply fee-for-service, and then sometimes with districts allocating some meal funds for us.
Follow up.
Follow up?
Could you give us a ballpark? Just to throw a number out there, say give or take a few thousand, just so because that didn't mean anything to me. I don't know how much money, I just want a general idea how much money goes through these BOCES.
Mr. Chairman, our current budget is $3 million, and as a former business manager of ours says, that's only on paper, so $3 million, it varies. We serve from 12 to 15 students a year. We're the smallest residential BOCES in the state.
And we run, I would say, 6-7 million. I would have to go and get the specific numbers, but in the past, we've upped our entire budget for what we do is $7 million.
Okay, yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
Residential BOCES, what are you talking about? What do you actually do?
Mr. Chairman, we currently serve children that have emotional disabilities, behavioral issues, the students in the state that have the most severe needs that either Department of Family Services has placed because of a child in need of services, or the districts have placed children that have gone through the IEP process, usually come to us very angry, very aggressive, very depressed, not able to function in a resource room within the school district, need very much a treatment and academic setting.
Follow up?
I would comment to the committee, off my experience in Committee 10, that this is a critical agency, that we have a real problem of getting enough of this kind of services in some instances. And so this is, the numbers may be small, but these kids are very difficult to deal with.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And over time, I've had the opportunity to visit the one in Jackson a time or two. And it is a very difficult population, and their infrastructure is, you know, they kind of have to fund that on their own, and it's difficult. And, you know, what I think is important is, yeah, if they go away, districts are going to send these kids out of state. And I don't know that we want to do that, right? I think we want to take care of our own, and we want to take care of them, you know, in Wyoming, as close to their communities as possible. You know, sometimes space away from parents is a good thing, but not space away from home like that. I don't like the idea that we would ship all of these really difficult population, that we would ship them out of state. So anything I think we can do with a little tweak in the law to let them have a little more money when they can get it, I think is a good thing. Thank you.
Well, I know that staffing is a critical issue. It takes a certain personality profile and a certain skill set in order to be able to operate under those conditions. And so you have to pay for it. Yes, go ahead.
And to comment to that point, we are a 24/7, 365 facility. We do have students who are at our facilities on Christmas, over Thanksgiving. And so we are staffing. And so when we compare, oftentimes, that's the big complaint I hear, is just the cost. It's a costly endeavor to serve this population. So this attempt is to try to lessen that cost to the state. If there are federal and state monies that we can get access to help us provide professional development, get technology, and those basic things that are hard for us to capture fees on, because we don't want, right now we're billing for everything to try to meet facility needs. I joke, but I have to mow our lawn. We need to have nice facilities, and I don't think directors or superintendents want to see lawn care on their statement when I'm billing for a student, but that's our reality, because as Carolyn mentioned, we don't receive some of those state funding. And so where that funding comes from, this is one layer of that whole funding question, but I think it goes to federal and state funds. And there are some competitive monies that, you know, I think we've seen that we'd like to look at, so.
Okay, yes, go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The thing I like about this bill is that it kind of takes one step further our interest in removing any kind of limitation that we have in statute for districts to work together. And I see that as this bill as moving that forward. I am curious, though, if you know of any districts that, if we pass this bill, that would join together, and what would they do?
Chairman,
Go ahead.
Representative Connolly, good question. I think there may be some that would be interested. I think they would sit down and have a conversation. If they would determine that would be best for their students and their community, I think they would join. I think smaller rural communities that have a difficult time, some of these grants, because I've worked on that side, are very labor intensive. To bring that money in, it's going to cost us an additional $10,000 or $20,000 just for the federal reporting that has to come back. So areas that I see that I would think about that I see other states doing are those post-secondary dollars, Perkins dollars. Are there ways that we can co-opt that? I believe that happened in the past. Carolyn let me know when we did things like that. She was the grant. Maybe you want to speak to that?
Well, we did do the Perkins grant and served many years, the Meeteetse, Tinsley, Shoshone, and the small districts in our catchment area. And we had a person who wrote the grant and then administered the grant, working collectively with those 4 or 5 districts. It was a great process, great collaboration with those districts.
Okay, further questions, comments from the committee? All right. Yes, okay, go ahead.
Come on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as far as accountability and audits go, who are you guys accountable to as board members of the BOCES? Who do you report to? And who audits your books? Like, there's a lot of money that goes through there, and it just kind of, nobody understands BOCES outside of education.
Absolutely. Let me, we're actually reviewing our audit tonight at our board meeting. So if you want to go on to our website and our board meeting, you can pull up that audit that we have. It'll be an audit of last fiscal year. We'll be presenting that to our board tonight when I get up to Casper after I'm done presenting here. So we have that. We have 13 member districts in our bylaws. That is Teton County, the two sublets, the 2 Sweetwaters, the 3 Uintas, the 2 Lincolns, Carbon 2, Fremont 14, and Fremont 24. I believe I got the 13. If I missed one, just I'll holler it out. And they designate a board member from each of those boards to sit on our board. And we meet monthly, and so we have a representative of those member districts. I think we're having a lot of conversation. What I would represent from their perspective is that we run a very specialized residential facility that used to be done regionally. When handicapped kids back in the day, they were sent to us to educate. Once districts, because of what the resources we put in, districts are able to serve students in their communities, which is a good thing. I promote that. So through time, we've become more specialized in the services. Carolyn's serves a certain population, a younger population. We have served a lot of more adolescent males. So there's some difference in our programming that's there. The question is that they're housed in like our residential facilities in Teton County. And so that brings a lot of added stressors when in fact, Teton County may have 1 student placed at that facility in Teton County. So I think understanding that, are we serving a regional perspective or are we serving a state perspective? And we need to get that because I get a lot of questions from my board because I'm serving DFS kids maybe from Natrona County. But Natrona County isn't a member of our services. So we've morphed through our services, and I don't know if the rules and how we do business have adapted as quickly. And so I think we're trying to figure that out because to what Representative Summers was saying, we need to serve our students in Wyoming. And we need to figure out how to do that. And we have a system that worked really well back in the day, but I don't know if has evolved to meet the current needs of our state. And I think if we change that, I think it'd help us operate.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And maybe go over, besides the residential piece of what you do, you have a lot of other services that you provide.
Yep.
Because small districts can't afford to have
Yep.
XYZ on staff.
Yep.
And you're able to have that person on staff and then basically contract them out to various districts. So it's kind of a cooperative effort
Yep.
for more skilled positions. So talk a little bit about.
So additional services, Chairman, Representative Summers. Additional services, one thing that's been growing is our day schools. We're serving our population of students because of, I guess, an identification. When I was a director in Uintah County, a lack of services in my area, I would have to look to place a student 100 miles away. So what we've done is created day schools, and we have 5 additional day schools: Evanston, Rock Springs, Fremont County, and Hudson. Svelers, that's where people most, Park County, and then Glen Rock serving Natrona and Commerce County school districts. And so what we're able to do on a lower rate is to serve this population that we used to serve residentially, hopefully at a step away from the school system before they need that residential component. So I know DFS and other state agencies, we're trying to provide more community-based services, and so that's what we've created. Also, there's been a demand for school psychologists, other mental health professionals, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and it's been hard to recruit those people. So we're trying to co-opt some of those services to try to provide some basic needs, at least in the interim until our districts can fill those needs, but that's going to take a while. There's a shortage nationally. And so if there's a way we can rethink how we provide those services, and we're trying to figure out if we can help or support districts in those endeavors. So we're exploring those. We're providing some of those services right now. And so those are some of the other things, professional development, where we can come in and we operate the CSTAG. This committee wrote a letter of support, and we facilitated this, the Stop School Violence, I'm talking my acronyms, I apologize. Stop School Violence Grant. It's comprehensive school threat assessment. We've been going out and training schools. It's completely free. We wrote the grant to train every school district, every school on this process. They don't have to. We're just there to do that, and we're getting we've already trained a lot of schools. So those are the type of things that we're able to add value. I don't want to do what the school districts are doing. I want to add value to the educational system on some of those areas that are difficult for districts to think about. When you talk about the mental health challenges, the threats that come to school, how can we come in and provide some of those community supports to support schools with some of their more challenging students?
Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to offer public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I do have an answer to the question posed about local education agency and whether it's in our state statutes. And the only place that it appears is in the military compact. And so it really is a term that's defined by federal law. And under federal law, it states it's as designated by the state. And I think this bill would clarify that for purposes of BOCES. I suspect what that definition is, or whether the BOCES would be eligible for those funds, is completely dependent upon the program. For instance, the definition for services with special education is then 34 CFR 300.28. But I didn't look through every single program that they may be eligible for, the Perkins program, IDEA, or other federal programs. So the purpose of identifying it in state statute for BOCES would be to clarify that they're eligible under any federal program that requires a local education agency designation. It's not a term in our state statutes, with the exception of the military compact.
All right. Do we have anyone online? Okay, I guess we'll close public comment. What's your pleasure, committee?
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved. Is there a second? Second? I don't know who seconded it. Was that Jerry? Oh, you did. Harshman. All right. Discussion on the bill. Do you want to go through it page by page, or you okay with it?
Question.
Okay, question's been called. Roll call.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0245, BOCES.
Co-chair, just a second.
Yeah, staff comment on page 4. The question of including the BOCES that are school district and community college, which are really aimed at allowing, at least in our area, allowing kids in high school to take community college courses. The question is, should we include them too? And they're a very different animal. Do we have any information on whether they need that?
Does LSO want to comment on that staff comment that you put on there?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, the majority of the BOCES with the post-secondary, I guess post-secondary BOCES, when it's a school district and a community college district, they generally are one-to-one, meaning it's one school district and one community college district. We just brought the staff comment as an advisory point that, you know, BOCES are more than just school districts, in essence of providing special education services in those member districts, but your BOCES statute is more broad in that a BOCES can contain a community college district and school districts or multiple school districts. And so we just brought it up as a point of consideration. I think it's a complex amendment because right now under subsection B on page 2, it talks about 2 or more school districts have to approve for the purposes of providing the federal grant. But we just wanted to raise that, you know, the limitation of this law and the definition of an LEA will not include a BOCES that is formed between a school district and a community college district. That was just the point of the staff comment.
Does that answer your question?
No, well, I think we don't know the answer to the question as to whether they would be useful or not. I don't think we can include them at this point. I think if it is something that's needed, if somebody could tip off some of their local BOCES that this is coming, then they could let us know and we could do it at the first committee and the legislature.
Sure, if you want to weigh in too.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Members of the committee. We have reached out to the post-secondary BOCES when we do this. There is a state agency called ACES. It's the Association of Cooperative Educational Service Agencies. And that makes up the 3 residential BOCES, SPED BOCES, we call them, and the 18 post-secondary. Some wrote letters of support to us. What I would say is what you are saying. I think they'd like to learn more. I think if there was additional funding that could be provided, depending on what that looks like. So there were some, I think it was, I'd say a mixed bag, but I definitely think that we could ask them and see. But they did in the materials that submitted in September. Sweetwater BOCES wrote a letter of support, I think even indicating they may have interest. Sublet BOCES, I believe, provided a letter of support, and I think they indicated, but I think this was a new concept for them. And we have been working with them and we educated them last spring on more around that. And so they are aware this is happening.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Scott, I think there's a couple of alternatives. One, we can put it in and then we find out over time, by the time it hits session, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea. Or we make sure the title's large enough to put it in when we get there. And I think that's the question I would have for Tanya.
My judgment, the title is large enough.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I do believe it is large enough. If you look at page 1, line 1, it says authorizing a board of cooperative educational services to act as an LEA for the purposes of applying and receiving state and federal grants. It doesn't designate that it's only BOCES comprised of school districts.
so there you go.
Okay. So if we move forward, we'll find out as we go, I
Yeah,
guess.
it sounds like they are aware of it, and they would need to approach a member and get an amendment prepared for the committee.
Right. Okay, let's do roll call then.
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown did leave proxy votes for today's bills as well. Would you like those counted?
Yes.
Okay. So on 23 LSO-0245 BOCES as local education agencies, Senator Beitman, Senator Ellis, Senator Rothfuss, Senator Salazar, Representative Andrew, Representative Brown left a vote of aye, Representative Connolly, Representative Harshman, Representative Nyman, Representative Newsom, Representative Overmueller, Representative Summers, Co-Chairman Scott, Chairman Paxton. Mr. Chairman, you have 13 ayes and 1 no.
The bill moves forward. Looks like the next item on our agenda, I'm on the right page here, is education mill levy amendments. Okay, LSO, go ahead.
Morning, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Matt Wilmarth, LSO. If you hearken back to September's meeting, we reviewed a white paper on BOCES, and I provided a series of policy considerations when we reviewed the BOCES statutes. And so today's bill draft will touch on that, which will hopefully provide some clarity in statute on when mill levies for vocational education or adult programs are to be reauthorized, and then also clarify the limitation of each BOCES agreement's mill levies for both the board-approved, school board-approved mill levies, as well as the community college board-approved mill levies. And Ms. Hanson will address the bill draft that's before you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm presenting Bill Draft 23, LSO 247 on education mill levy amendments. Page 2 amends 21-12-103 by creating a new subsection B, which requires reauthorization of the adult education mill levy at each 10th general election. Page 3 amends 21-2109A to clarify that the school districts comprising the board may levy a special school district tax not to exceed 1/2 mil for each BOCES agreement. The bill draft clarifies that the total mill levies the school district comprising the board may levy for all BOCES agreements cannot exceed 1 1/2 mils. The committee should consider that this bill draft may be viewed as a revenue-raising bill draft because of the school district's varying interpretations on the maximum mills that can be assessed by the school district boards. Some school districts have interpreted the statute to allow the school district boards to assess a total of 1/2 mil, while other school district boards have assessed a 1/2 mil for each BOCES agreement, which in some instances total 1 1/2 mils. For the school districts that have already assessed a total of 1/2 mils, this bill draft would not raise in revenue, but this for the school districts that have only interpreted the statute for a total of 1/2 mil, this could be perceived as a revenue-raising bill draft.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, why we're on this, one thing I want to make sure that 1.5 mils is the maximum that any district is doing. Is that correct currently? Or is there, because I thought I saw something about one that was doing 4.
Mr. Chairman, the board-approved mill levies is what we're talking about.
Right.
We're not talking about the voter-approved mill levies, which are a maximum of 2 mills. This is school district voter-approved. Currently, right now, the school board-approved is not clear whether or not it's for each agreement or in total. And so that was the policy consideration that was raised in the white paper in September, was that some districts have interpreted that to be a limitation of 1/2 mil for all of their agreements. And some agreements are 1/2 mil for each agreement. The total, or the maximum that the board approved mill levies is 1 1/2 mil, and those occur in Fremont 14 and Fremont 21. Those are the only 2 districts with 1.5 mils. The second largest is in Hot Springs, number 1, 1.4 mils. Then you have Uinta 6 at 1.2 mils. All of those school districts have at least 3 BOCES agreements.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. That's what I was wondering, how many BOCES agreements. I mean, how much mill they're approving in any one agreement is one thing, but I wanted to make sure there wasn't a district that had 4 agreements out there.
Mr. Chairman, Fremont 14 and Fremont 21 do have 4 agreements, but they only assess 1/2 mil. There's, I believe it's their Fremont BOCES, or maybe, I can't recall which one they don't assess a mill on, but there is 1 mill levy that they do not assess a mill levy on. The varying interpretations, I'll point out two. One is Teton County School District number 1. They have 3 agreements. They only assess 1/2 mil, and it's varying amounts for each of their agreements. And Carbon County School District number 2 is another district that have 2 agreements and only 1/2 mil. That's why we raised this policy consideration, to provide some clarity and direction to school districts on what that is. And I think the direction from the committee in September was, don't increase or don't go beyond the 1.5 mils, what is the current maximum amount any one district is assessing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm trying to sort this out. So on page 2, paragraph B, and that addresses when the voters vote on a mill levy. Is that correct? And that can be up to 2.5 mils?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Newsom, this is not a BOCES mill levy. This is the Adult Education Program mill levy in 2112-103. As part of the review of BOCES, these mill levies are helped to supplement BOCES programs. These are separate and apart from BOCES, and there are 2 school districts that assess these BOCES. They are Carbon County School District number 1 and Fremont County School District number 2. But the statute provides no direction on whether or not those are to be reauthorized. So in Carbon County School District's case, they put that, their voters elected to put up to 2.5 or 1.5 mil levies in the year 2000. That has not been reauthorized by the voters since 2000. In Fremont County School District number 2's case, their voters elected to put up to 2.5 mils for this purpose in 2006. Again, no direction in the statute on whether or not that goes back to the voters to be reauthorized. So again, the policy consideration that we raised was, does the committee want to provide some direction on the adult program mill levy on if and when a reauthorization of that occurs? And I think the direction from the committee in September was provide at least every 20 years, and we've put every 10th general election to mirror a similar language in law. That is, so this mill levy is separate and apart from BOCES, and that's why the title's a little bit more broad in that it's education mill levies, not just BOCES mill levies.
So then if I follow that, then as we go to page 3 and line 5 and beyond, that is specific to BOCES and the mill levies allowed by a school board to increase those mill levies for BOCES specifically.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Newsom, that's correct. Both of these mill levies are school district board mill levies or school district mill levies. The one in 2112-103 is authorized by voters. The one in 2120-109 is authorized by this, in subsection A, is authorized by the school boards.
Thank you so much.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the page 4, line 12, we're changing not to exceed 2 mils to 2.5 mils. Is that to conform with the existing language on page 2, line 9, or is that a different issue?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Scott, the page 4 deals with the community college mill levies, and the direction of the committee at the September meeting was to increase that the voter that the college district board approved mill levy, when combined with the voter approved mill levy, cannot exceed 2.5 mils. And that was the direction of the committee at September meeting, to increase that from 2. So on page 3, that one deals with school districts, and page 4 deals with community college district board approved mill levies, and when they're combined, line 12, when they're combined with voter approved mill levies.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, the practical effect is, again, this could be varying interpretations. And the example I provided in September was, you went to county school district number 1. They assess, I believe, 2.7 mill levies in total. And when you combine their total school board approved mill levies and their community college board approved mill levies, or sorry, when you this subsection H talks about their voter approved mill levies. Their voter approved mill levies, when combined with their community college board BOCES approved mill levy, exceeds the limitation under current law of 2. And so again, I was raising the issue in September. I don't know if I believe it's Western Wyoming Community College has multiple BOCES agreements with multiple school districts. One could argue that their board approved, the community college board approved mill levy is not with Uintah County School District number 1, that it's with another school district. But I can't make that affirmative. And so when you combine Uintah County School District number 1's voter approved mill levies, which are two mill levies, and their college board approved mill levy, it exceeds the 2 mill levy limitation currently in law. And so what this does in practical terms is ensures that there is no misinterpretation of what is currently occurring.
Okay, follow up, you okay? All right. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chair. And first, thanks to Representative Newsom for your question that clarified something I had a question about. But I'm now concerned about the first section, the 2112-103, about the problem that it's solving. I honestly see the problem that's being solved with the next 2 sections. But if I'm reading this correctly, the only problem, if you want to call it, that's being solved with this section is an obligation for an election every 20 years. It doesn't change a mill levy. It doesn't change what districts are doing. There's no inconsistency among or between districts. All this is doing is obligating an election every 20 years to reauthorize. Am I correct there?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, yes.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I don't like it. Oops.
All right, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I was just continuing with saying that this could be viewed as being a revenue-raising bill draft. So if that is, I would recommend that this bill draft starts in the House if that's, if you vote to sponsor it. But then on page 5, this amends 39-13-104 to include these BOCES mill levies within the tax code because they currently are not within the tax code, and it just clarifies exactly what was discussed in 2120-101A and 2121-10A. And then section 2 on page 5 provides for an effective date of July 1st, 2023.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess the question, I think I remember it from the last meeting, but I'm going to ask it. Has the current situation, status quo, ever been challenged in court in the state of Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, not that I am aware of.
Thank you. I always go back to, are we fixing a problem? And I don't know that we are, but that's remains to be seen.
Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the, going to the perception of tax increase, on page 4, line 12, that one with the strikeout of 2 and the 2.5, is that one of the sections you're referring to? And are there other sections that you're referring to that could create the perception of tax increase?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Mueller, I would say that, yes, that is one of the potentially revenue raising from 2 to 2.5. And just on page 3, since it is clear in the statute now that you're increasing it from 1 1/2 those districts that were mentioned that are already doing 1 and 1/2 would, like, there would be no revenue raising because they would just continue what they were doing. But if BOCES that is doing 1/2 decides that now that they want to do 1 and 1/2, then that they could potentially go up to 1 and 1/2, because this is clear that that's the max now.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And kind of following along the same lines, who's made the determination in districts that the maximum that they can raise is 1.5 rather than the 2.5? And so again, I'm going to this question of, is this needed? Is it just a misinterpretation? Are they getting legal interpretations from their school district council? Who's telling them that that the combined agreements can't be more than 1.5?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Connolly, I don't think anybody's saying that their combined total can be greater than 1.5. I think BOCES or school boards have taken varying interpretations of the law. And we've provided examples of some school districts have limited their total BOCES mill levies, regardless of the number of agreements, to 1/2 mil. Some school districts have interpreted it to be 1/2 mil for each agreement. I don't know what advice they've been given. We, as staff, just reviewed the varying mill levies and wanted to, I don't know that it's clear in statute that it's for each agreement or if it's in total. And so we wanted to raise it with the committee as a point of clarification. On the community college and the voter-approved mill levies, there is a case in Uinta County School District Number 1 where their voters have approved 2 mill levies. They also have an agreement with Western Wyoming Community College, which assesses 1/2 mill levy. When you combine those 2 mill levies, it is greater than the maximum of 2 mills under subsection H. Again, this goes back to, I don't know if Western's mill levy is approved under that Uinta 1 agreement or another agreement. And so, again, it was just a policy consideration for this body to consider whether or not there needed to be some clarification. Again, I'm not saying there's any violation. We just wanted to, I believe there are varying interpretations out there. And so this was just an opportunity to perhaps clear it up, but there is some risk in that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Follow up?
Follow up?
So it's varying interpretations, but no problem that we are aware of, no lawsuit, no question coming to, and I'm not even sure to whomever. It wouldn't come to LSO. Would it go to a county attorney or a school board attorney who gives a determination that, oh no, we can't go above the 1.5, or if you add this together, you're going to 2.5. We don't have a problem, but when reviewing, you saw that inconsistency and see it between and among our districts, that it appears that we have some districts that are saying the maximum we can go is 1.5. Do we know for sure, for example, that those districts that are at 1.5 have said that's as much as we can do?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Connolly, I don't know what advice has been given. And I think how I interpret this is I think some districts have said or interpreted the statutes to be the maximum we can go is 1/2 mil, or the maximum we can do is 1/2 mil for each agreement. And I think they could have 10 agreements and levy 5 total mills under that interpretation. We just know that under the current BOCES agreements, 2 school districts have levied at least 1.5 mills. Those 2 school districts have 4 agreements. I'm surprised they don't have 2 mills.
Mr. Chair, one more. I want to go back to the 2112-103. Right now, there is no obligation for a renewal of the mill levy under 2112-103. However, can a board choose to discontinue a particular mill levy on its own?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Connolly, I'll let Ms. Hanson weigh in as well. I don't think there's any direction in that statute, whether or not it goes away or not. I believe how it reads now is it's in perpetuity. Those voters in Carbon County School District number 1 in the year 2000 put on a tax in perpetuity based on the current read and has authorized the board to levy up to 1.5 mils as they see fit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So back on page 4, that line 12. So changing the 2 to 2.5 is that to accommodate what's actually happening in practice? Is that what that change is about?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Obermueller, correct. This ensures that if the BOCES in Uinta County School District number 1 were to be challenged, that their voter-approved 2 mils and their agreement with Western Wyoming Community College, which is assessed 1/2 mil, is in the clear.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up?
So is it possible to interpret this bill as actually capping what districts can do, and that rather than thinking of it as a tax raise or increase or bill, that it's actually setting some sidebars and limits?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, I would say that it is creating some limitations on setting the bar about what is currently happening. That, for example, in this one, they're already doing 2.5 mils. So this was just setting, like, showing that, yes, that's just what is currently happening, setting the bar. But I potentially on the other one, it could be viewed as revenue raising if the school boards that are already doing 1/2 mil decide that, oh, now they can't, that the total mill levies is 1.5, that they could start have more agreements if they wanted to raise it to 1.5, because they're currently only doing 1/2 mil levy.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But that's basically what we have now. I mean, there's no, this is, ultimately, we have an unrestricted ability to be able to assess mills. And so they could, like you said, that would be my interpretation or my opinion on that, because they're already doing it. I mean, there's some that only have half, there's some that have 1.5, and so they see that each time that they have that opportunity, they can assess that. This is simply putting, and I agree with Representative Obermueller, this is putting a structure, a cap on, and limiting their ability just to have an endless number of mills that they can assess. And so I would say this is more of a cap than really a revenue generating, because right now, they can do that. There's nothing stopping them, so.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you know, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever been around a school board when they had a discussion about these mill levies, but they're elected just like we are, and they have very hard discussions about whether they want to tax their public a 1/2 mil or, I mean, I've seen it in ours. We don't, because we have a higher assessed valuation than some. And they have real discussion about how much they're going to tax and put into the BOCES programs. And there's some districts that don't tax at all and put into the BOCES program, deciding that they would rather pay for services because they don't want to tax their public. So I think there's checks and balances because there's people just like us elected in different positions.
Okay, anyone else? Anything else for LSO? All right, thank you. Anything else from the committee before we go to public comment? All right, we'll open public comment. Anyone like to comment on this bill? Anyone online waiting to comment? Okay. Further comments from the committee? What's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Bill's been moved. Is there a second? And seconded by Nyman. All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, this is a complicated little thing, but I think when you come down. Mr. Chairman, it does put a cap on the mill levies that's clear, and there isn't one now that is clear. And it does it in a way that doesn't knock out what anybody is doing now, it just keeps them from going further. So I think that's valuable, have some clarity in there and have a limitation that is clear. Second thing it does as a matter of substance is it does away with this one area where it looks like they put a perpetual tax in. We're saying, no, every 20 years at least, you got to go back to the electorate and see if they still approve it. And Mr. Chairman, I think that's a valuable limitation on these things. You know, the world does change, and I think if we have voter approval, it ought to be renewed at some level, and this is the way we can renew it, do it without having anybody in violation already. So, Mr. Chairman, for those two reasons, I think this is a good bill.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to vote against this bill. I do agree with page 2. I think that's a fix. But I think local boards understand their electorate, and I think particularly as a guy coming from a small district area, I think these mills allow for some great opportunities for districts to have cooperation among themselves. And I see as we go on in the future, and the more and more challenges there are, the more they may need to create these coordinated efforts with these BOCES. And so I think they have that hard discussion amongst themselves about whether they want to tax their people or not tax their people. For that reason, I'm going to vote against it, even though I believe what's on page 2 is a good fix and needs fixed.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to propose an amendment on page 2, line 16. Strike the word 10th and insert 4th. Yes. Page 2, line 16. Strike the word 10th, insert 4th, so it'll read every 4th general election. It's 10 years is an eternity in politics. Things change rapidly. Budgets change. Economic situations change. The voters should have more of a say in these mill levies. If it's a good thing, they'll get renewed anyway. Just putting it up for a vote every 4 years is not too much to ask. I think that's absolute. 4 years should be the maximum, I think, but I'm offering 4 years for discussion. That's 8 years? Okay, so make it second. Sorry, I'll rephrase my amendment. At each second general election. Thank you.
Okay, everyone understand the amendment? Okay. All right, any discussion on the amendment?
I have just a question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So the districts that currently have this tax that they think is in perpetuity, then they would be, put that in front of the voters at the next general election? Is that the idea? Or would they have those 4 years? Just a point of clarification.
Go ahead.
That's the intent, but I'll defer to LSO for clarity.
Mr. Chairman, how I interpret Representative Newsom's question is, do we need to provide a non-codified section to the 2 school districts that have authorized these mill levies, these adult education mill levies? And it might not be a bad idea that you provide some direction to those school districts that would say, you know, for the current mill levies that are authorized not later than 2 years or 4 years from the effective date of this act shall be, voted on by the electorate at the next general election, or the general election 4 years from now.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my question is, is this the BOCES that does, kind of BOCES that do special education, or is it?
Mr. Chairman, these are not BOCES mill levies. These are the adult education
Adult
program mill
education.
levies. While these are separate and apart from BOCES, my understanding is these mill levies help supplement BOCES programming or funding.
Senator Beitman, did you want to?
I would
Clarify
include that clarification. I would defer to LSO to give us that clarification that we just talked about.
That meets
with
the intent, what they just said meets the intent of the
Absolutely.
amendment.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Is that clear enough for LSO folks? Okay. Further discussion on, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, on and against the amendment. I do think that it is important that we have a periodic renewal of this on an election basis. I think doing it every 4 years is likely to be a bit disruptive to the program. I think a longer time period is more appropriate, Mr. Chairman. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against the amendment.
Okay, any other comments? All right. Sensing you're ready to vote on the amendment, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? No? Chairs in doubt, all in favor, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, I don't know why I was in doubt. All opposed? All right, so the amendment failed.
Chairman,
Yes.
I'd move on page 2, line 16, to change 10th to 5th. I just think 20 years is a long, long time. 10 years, I'm trying to find a better number
Okay,
with the qualifying language of how to transition for the current BOCES, or excuse me, the current, I haven't had enough coffee this morning. Yeah, I think LSO, you understand what I'm talking about, right?
Mr. Chairman, I would second.
okay, moved and seconded. Further discussion on this amendment? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would urge us to adopt this amendment. I think 10 years is a reasonable time period, something like this.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, sensing you're ready to vote. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, raise your hand. Okay, the amendment passes. Back on the bill? Yes, go ahead.
Make sure on page 4, if I could ask our staff again, you know, the testimony by our staff, this is a revenue raiser potentially. I mean, the current limit on line 11 and 12 is 2 mills. I mean, that's the current limit. It's limited, and we're raising the limit for one BOCES district potentially. There's not 30 BOCES districts out there over 2.
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, let me kind of re-explain what this provision provides for. Currently, community college districts can assess 1/2 mil for its BOCES agreement. When you combine any voter-approved BOCES mill levy, the combination of the voter-approved from the school district and the community college cannot exceed 2 mills. So there is a instance in Uintah County School District number 1 where their voters have approved 2 mills. They have a BOCES agreement with Western Wyoming Community College, which assesses 1/2 mil. When you combine the voter-approved 2 mills and the community college's 1/2 mil, that's 2.5 mills, which could be interpreted exceeds the limitation under current law.
Okay, follow up, are you okay? Potential.
Mr. Chairman, I think you can interpret it in the aspect that the community college mill levy for BOCES has no bearing or is not impacted by any school district electorate mill levy approval. meaning whatever the voters decide on their additional BOCES mill levies will not impact the limitation of the community college board approved mill levy. But it does increase the cap under the current structure.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I may, Matt, what would happen if we struck this one back to 2? What would that have, what effect would that ultimately have on that district that has that other 0.5% to Western?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Nyman, I don't know. Again, this goes back, I don't, the community college, Western Wyoming Community College has multiple agreements with school districts. And I don't know if their interpretation is that their community college board approved mill levy is with another school district and not necessarily the Uinta County School District's voters' 2 mill levies. I don't know. It's a gray area, and I don't know how to interpret that.
Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. When a community college has a BOCES agreement with a district, is that mill levy assessed only within that school district, or is it assessed in the community college district?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Newsom, great question. It is within the community college district.
Follow up? You okay? Senator Office.
I want Representative Newsom to say, huh? Mr. Chairman, after this discussion, I'm kind of left in a place where I agree with Representative Summers about the fact that I don't know that we're solving a problem here, because I never have heard anyone come and complain about a problem where school districts are struggling or they need more help and that this is going to help them to solve their problems. I feel more like we're doing something the federal government does a lot, which is just sort of force down an idea upon states, because a bunch of people were sitting in a room and identified something they perceived as a problem that nobody was clamoring for. And here's the solution, whether we like it or not. And it's going to be a specific interpretation. We have tools for districts that, in fact, I think they're probably underutilizing. If anything, we'd like to see more BOCES. That raises local revenue. It provides flexibility for school districts and to work with their community colleges, do good things. We've seen nothing but good things done with these funds, and I think we've seen them used judiciously. The idea that we would step in now because we've identified a little ambiguity and change things when it might not be changed in a direction that helps school districts, it just seems like we're over-governing. I don't think we need this bill at this point in time. I think if somebody comes along and says they have a problem, we can welcome that. We'll try and solve the problem. But unless there's somebody in here that wants to stand up and say this bill is solving a problem, I don't know why we're voting for this bill.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I will say exactly that I think this bill is solving a problem, because I think we are seeing that what we have done with the limitations is not clear, and it's being interpreted differently in different school districts. So I think it's valuable to clarify that before you have a problem and a lawsuit. Then we have to come in and say, what did we mean? That's first. Second, I do think we are adding the limitation of now every 10 years, that 1 mill levy, you've got to, if it's voter renewed, it isn't perpetual, it has to be redone. And I think that's a valuable change to protect the taxpayers we represent. Gives them a chance to look at it again. If it's worth having a voter approval in the first place, there ought to be a periodic renewal on it. So I think that's valuable. And for both those reasons, I would urge us to adopt the bill.
Okay, further discussion? Further discussion? Questions been called? Roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0247, Education Mill Levy Amendments as amended. Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown left a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers.
No.
Co-Chairman Scott.
Aye.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes and 6 noes.
Okay, the bill passes. And it looks like we're running a little ahead of schedule for a break.
Awesome.
So I think we'll just take about a 15-minute break right here. Because I have to go to the bathroom.
That's a good reason. It's a natural thing, Jerry. That's a complicated case. It is, it is. Well, see, and the only thing that I can see in it that would concern me is that 2.5. Right now, there is nothing stopping all the rest of those districts from as deep as they want to go. We basically put a limit, and we made it so that they have to take it to the voters to ask them. I was thinking, you said 2 terms, you did 2 terms. I'm like, every 4 years, if you have a program, you didn't know within 4 years, you have a program or not. Might be even, you can't even get people interested in fixing stuff, because if they could go away in a year, it's like you get the land lease. There's a guy leasing
Got a quorum, don't we?
I'll step out.
Meeting come back to order. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the WDE, additional information on school district expenditures. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I am Shelley Hamill with the Wyoming Department of Education, Chief Academic Officer, and I'm here with my colleague Trent Carroll, our Chief Operations Officer. This career and technical education memo was requested by the committee at the September meeting to provide additional information about CTE funding provided to school districts. CTE programs in Wyoming school districts are supported by both state and federal funds. The information provided in this memo then is divided into two parts, one about federal funds and one about state funds. And we'll start by reviewing the federal funds first. The Perkins 5 funds are made available to districts annually and are used for the purchase of equipment, supplies, professional development, and any other CTE program expenditures that are authorized under the federal Perkins program. Over the first 4 years of Perkins 5, which was authorized in 2019, the Wyoming Department of Education received awards in the amounts of anywhere from $5.1 million to $5.6 million annually. For the 2021 school year, the WDE received just over $5.3 million. I want to pause there for a second and add some information that's not in the memo. That $5.3 million has some specific carve-outs or set-asides that are required by the federal level before we have the ability to use any of the other funds. Those carve-outs are for three specific buckets. Those are the area of leadership, professional development, and special populations. Of the remaining funds then, the agency has the opportunity to choose to set aside an additional 15% that is used for districts, but can be targeted use by the agency. Then that remaining 85%, not 85% of the whole, but 85% of the remaining, is funded out through formula to the school districts that are in higher education that are interested in participating in the Perkins program.
Mr. Chairman? Ms. Hamill, can you put a finer point between the difference between like leadership and personal development or professional development?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, the leadership funds can specifically support initiatives or opportunities for growth that often do probably look a lot like professional development, but we choose to use a good portion of those funds for the externships that are required in the Perkins 5 plan. Professional development can be specific to a topic area. CTE covers a wide variety of topics, and we may have educators in the field that feel that their district isn't able to necessarily provide specific professional development around current trends, and would look for those professional development opportunities outside of their district.
Okay. Follow up?
So just so I understand it, you said three buckets. Do you try and divide that money somewhat equally between those three buckets, or do you give us a sense of how those dollars are allocated among those buckets?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I believe that those are required to be divided out equally.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Of the 85% then, that is identified to be distributed to school districts. I want to also say that that 85% then is split between 60-40 split, 60% for K-12, 40% for higher education. So this is a situation where the federal funds that the WDE receives are for K-12 and higher ed. That's one of the few buckets of money that we receive, federal funds that have that type of a spread. So the WDE then did award just over $2.2 million to the 37 districts for the 2020-21 school year that were interested in participating. For that same year, districts reported federal Perkins expenditures in the amount of $2,060,623. I want to call out that typo that was there. I think the memo says 2022. It should have said 2021, the last sentence of that paragraph. School districts that choose then to...
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see here, Ms. Hamel, that it says that 37 districts applied. Do you know the reasons 11 other districts did not apply? Or do you have any insight into those districts that chose not to participate?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, we often hear that districts feel that the paperwork burden or the federal responsibilities are too high for the amount of money that they receive. We also have heard of late that the parameters by which the districts can use those funds that they're tied to don't necessarily meet the needs of that specific district, and so they may have chosen not to. For this school year, we are up to 39 districts participating.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just to follow up to that, can you give us an example of the parameters that don't meet the needs? I'm just trying to understand that argument.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Committee, there are some requirements in the Perkins 5 state plan that's approved federally that programs be based on local needs assessment, so a comprehensive local needs assessment, and that they be high need, high skill, and high wage. And our plan identifies that any programs that are funded with federal Perkins funds address two of those three areas. And there may be a program in a school district that doesn't necessarily meet those two criteria based on their local needs assessment or the salaries that students would be able to earn once completing those paths. And so the Perkins funds would not be available for use for those specific CTE tracks.
Good.
Okay, so school districts then that do choose to participate and apply and receive those Perkins 5 formulaic allocations are also eligible to participate in another optional and competitive grant opportunity called the Cutting Edge Grant. That was carved out after the required set-asides to be able to support some of our districts that receive smaller allocations. As I just mentioned, some districts feel that the small amount of money that they receive through the formula isn't worth their time and doesn't really address the needs that they have. So this cutting edge competitive opportunity provides them with a chance then to participate in a greater amount of funding to be able to maybe purchase some of those high dollar tickets, equipment, pieces of equipment, or to stand up and start potentially a new program that is high need, high wage. So during the 2020-21 school year, districts were awarded an additional just under $360,000 for that. The 12 districts then that received this funding focused on projects on a wide variety of ideas and topics, from enhancements to agricultural projects to updates in fabrication labs and equipment for current practices to update. And at that, I'll stand for any other questions before turning the time over to Chief Carroll.
Okay, questions from the committee? I don't see any.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Trent Carroll, Wyoming Department of Education. If you'll move to page 2 of the memo in your packet, we'll talk briefly about state funding for CTE. So first, we'll talk about the model funding. in accordance with Wyoming statute and our administrative rules, the model provides resources for additional CTE staffing, as well as additional CTE supplies and equipment. The additional CTE teachers are generated in the model by calculating the number of full-time equivalent students in grades 9 through 12 that are enrolled in CTE courses. And then we apply a weighting of 29% to that count to calculate a weighted student count in each district. The weighted student count is divided by 21 to come up with the additional teachers. So it's a ratio of 1 to 21 additional teachers, teacher to student ratio. In school year 2021, the model resourced an additional just under $3.3 million for CTE teachers. And then the additional funding for supplies and equipment, which is also, I would note, subject to ECA, for the same school year was just over $10,300 per student, total amount of $2.9 million statewide. So that's a quick overview of the model funding for CTE. I would emphasize that this funding is in addition, so it's in addition to the other resources in the model for core teachers, specialist teachers, and minimum teachers. So there is some amount that isn't delineated in the model that could be considered available for CTE programs, just like any other content area. We'll come back to that here in a minute. But due to the nature of the block grant funding that I just described, there are some obvious limitations to comparisons of CTE model funding and actual CTE expenditures. And we've talked about this some of the earlier meetings this year with regard to the crew report and some of those limitations, because really the only comparison that we can make is with regard to the additional funding for CTE relative to the entire amount reported by districts for CTE. Okay, in addition to the model resources, we've also historically received a state appropriation for what we call CTE demonstration project grants. Those have been in the amount of about $250,000 per year. They are competitive grants awarded to support planning, development, and implementation of new or expanded high school CTE programs in accordance with Wyoming Statute 2112-105. And these grants are intended to prepare students for post-secondary options, connect academic and technical curriculum, and provide innovative opportunities to ensure career choices that reflect the economic needs of Wyoming. And I would note here at the end that the appropriation for those CTE demo grants was reduced during the 2021 session. We had a 15% across the board reduction, you might recall, to our school foundation program budgets. So that is now at $425,000 for the biennium. And then lastly, Mr. Chairman, on the next page, you'll see table 1 is a comparison. We tried to lay out a very simple table here that shows both the allocation and the expenditure for school year 2020-21. First, the model resources, again with that caveat, you'll see in the footnote that this is really only a comparison of the additional funding for CTE relative to the entire amount reported for CTE. And then the second column is the federal funding that Chief Hamill already went over, just over $2.2 million allocated and just over $2 million expended for that year. And then that last column are those CTE demo grants, $250,000 awarded with $149,000 expended. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess on those demo grants, how long has that gone on? And that's, once again, that's just for starting up new programs, and there's kind of quite a few constraints around that even. So what, how long has that been in place?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I'd have to look at the exact year that started. It's been around for quite a while. 2010, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, questions from the committee? Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Chair, I'm curious if districts can share equipment. When I think about this, so where I'm thinking of is a culinary arts program. Right, I think lots of our districts have culinary arts program as part of CTE. And I just looked up how much does a commercial pizza oven cost, which I think would be a great kind of piece of equipment for a culinary arts program. People like pizza, right? It costs $44,000, right? That's a lot of money, right? It's right under this $50,000. But I'd like to see districts be able to share it. Is that possible?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, we do have some districts that are participating in consortiums because their amount of money is so small. So I would imagine that through the agreement that if they identified the sharing of equipment, they may be able to share equipment. The example that you use around culinary is probably a hard bar because, as we all know, that's often not a high-wage industry.
Follow up?
So the way this bill is written, do you see the abilities for districts to be able to put in a grant proposal together?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly, nothing is coming to mind that I think prevents that, but I would want to reread it again with that lens. I also need to make one correction to the response to Senator Ellis's question about those 3 carve-outs that are federally required. They are not equal, but they are dictated, the division is dictated by the federal government.
Representative Obermuller, did you have a question? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Looks like you're off the hook. I see some CTE folks in the back. I would imagine that you may want to comment on this. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Jessie Defoe with the Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education. Joined with me today, Rob Hill, and we would just like to come and speak in support of this piece of legislation. We think it would be very helpful for districts, and we'd like to share some specific statistics of a survey we just took from our teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Again, Rob Hill. I serve as president of Wyoming Skills USA and public policy chairman for the Wyoming Association of Career and Technical Education. We support this proposed legislation because it addresses needs to fund our local programs with not only tools, but very needed materials. We've seen escalated prices over the last several years, and this grant will help our local level programs address those discrepancies between what they can purchase and the cost today. In a survey just completed by our organization, we had a very large sample size. Our teachers reported on average a budget of about $7,600. The funding model calls for about $10,300. 80% of our respondents reported negative impacts on their ability to deliver curriculum due to inflation pressures. 93% of our respondents reported flat or declining written budgets. This bill not only offsets shortfalls in fundings for programs in need, but helps address our local programs. So in 2021, I believe we had some grants that helped offset some of these shortfalls. About 60% of our teachers do report that they do get some extra tools from various funding sources. So we feel that this bill would kind of catch us up to where we were prior to some of the budget cuts we saw in the past and really address that need for our programs at the local level. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Rob, I think at one point you explained to me kind of on the Perkins money, and it was raised by, Senator Ellis. Obviously, we all know what federal strings are and that gets complicated. But can you kind of expand on the difficulties with some of the federal Perkins grant and the ability for you all to utilize those funds?
Sure. I can give you a great personal example, Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers. I operate off of a grant on a construction program at Pathways Innovation Center. I use that money for materials, which is seed money. I produce a product, I sell it in the community, and the money goes back into my program. We've been doing this for a number of years, and that's very helpful. With the Perkins, it's difficult to produce something with materials and then sell it and move it back in. So there's limitations on what we can do with materials. A lot of this funding could be used for seed money to help programs be sustainable over time. But yeah, we do have limitations from our federal money. This would really help as far as flexibility.
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman, and the reason there was an updated draft, and I intended to have it in it originally, and talking to Mr. Hill, and that is, we want to try to ensure that districts are using the money they have, and so the idea behind this is, and it did it with a priority for the grant. The idea is if you're utilizing the resources you have, then you'd be eligible, and I think that was the hope of Mr. Hill, to try to do the carrot, okay, if you're utilizing your resources and need a little more, this grant would be available to that. But if you're not, then you would be limited. And you like that idea, is that right, Mr. Hill?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Summers, yes, it's very appealing. I think it's very appealing to districts and our teachers. It's a catalyst to spend money on CTE as intended by the legislature when the 29% law was created in 2002. And I think it both addresses that need and the inflationary pressures we've seen of late.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
We may have
Chairman.
gotten a little ahead of ourselves. We'll maybe bring Tanya up here to go over the bill as proposed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. The bill is 23 LSO 248, School Finance Career Technical Education Grants, and this is Working Draft 7. As Representative Summers pointed out, this is a bill that he worked with our office on in preparing, and we did provide in a revised copy. This bill generally creates a competitive grant process for school districts for career technical education supplies, materials, and equipment, and appropriates $250,000 for this first year to be included in the standard budget. I'll go ahead and walk through the bill at this time. Page 1, line 10 through page 5, line 3 creates 21-13-337. This outlines the components of the grant, and it's within the school finance section of the statute. Page 2, lines 2 through 14 creates subsection A, authorizing school districts to apply for funds for supplies, materials, and equipment for new or existing career technical education programs. These funds would be in addition to any funds provided under the Education Resource Block Grant model for CTE supplies, materials, and equipment. You'll note on lines 9 through 14 that school districts are not able to apply for the demonstration project grant, which was noted by the Department of Education. And Just a point of clarity on that, that program was created in 2003, and at that time it received an appropriation of $250,000 and has been included in their standard budget request since that time. Moving on to page 2, line 16 through page 3, line 10, this creates subsection B, which provides that the grant is for 2 years and shall not exceed $50,000 per year. It also outlines the dates upon which the grant applications are to be submitted to the Department of Education. The remaining grant components and application requirements can be found on page 3, lines 1 through 16. It basically requires that there's some relationship to the career technical education program to the workforce education and economic needs of Wyoming. They're required to outline the purpose, plan, and timeline for expenditure of the grant amounts and provide assurances that the school facilities appropriately accommodate the program for which they're requesting funds to buy supplies, materials, and equipment. And then any other information required by the department rule. Subsection C on page 3, line 16 through page 4, line 17 requires the Department of Education notify the district by August 15th regarding the award or denial, along with the reasons for the denial or the award. And I would note the dates provided within this and in the bill yesterday that had the grant application. I took those from the CTE demonstration program grant. These dates align with that program. That's the reason for those dates. Moving on to page 4, lines 1 through 14, this provides that a first preference will be given to districts that will expend or have expended the entire amount generated by the Education Resource Block Grant Model for CTE supplies, materials, and equipment. That's the provision that was changed from the prior draft that Representative Summers noted. And then a second preference would be given to any school district that has not received a grant in the immediately 5 preceding school years. Subsection D on lines 16 through 19 requires districts to report the expenditures along with any other information required by department rule and regulation. Subsection E on lines 21 and 22 requires the Department of Education to promulgate the rules necessary to carry this program out. Subsection F on page 5, lines 1 through 3 defines the programs that are eligible under this bill consistently with those within the Education Resource Block Grant Model, and that definition can be found in 2113-309 MVD capital 2I. Section 2 amends the demonstration CTE grant that has been mentioned a couple of times. On page 5, lines 5 through page 6, line 5, it just clarifies that districts can't receive these funds in addition to the grant program created under Section 337 that we previously discussed. Section 3 contains on page 6, lines 7 through 19 contains the appropriation for $250,000. That appropriation is effective July 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2024. It would be utilized to fund the grants that we previously discussed, and it is the intent that this would be included in the Department of Education standard budget for the immediately succeeding fiscal years. Page 6, line 21 through page 7, line 3 creates section 4. This requires the Data Advisory Committee, which is already created under statute, to study and provide reports to better identify expenditures on career technical education supplies and materials and equipment. This section was added in response to some of the discussion that you heard from the department today and over the interim, the difficulty sort of parsing out who's spending what on CTE materials and equipment. Section 7, page 7, lines 5 through 8 creates section 5, provides that this act is effective immediately. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Tanya, remind me, and we went with a preference And we talked about, just flat out going, okay, instead of a preference, if you haven't expended that amount, within that time period, then you're not allowed to have the grant. So is there something that, and I honestly don't remember, is there a reason that we could not make it tighter than that, above and beyond a preference? I think Matt and you and I talked, and I'm trying to remember that conversation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, there's no reason you couldn't make this applicable to only those districts that have expended those funds. My recollection of that conversation is just at the end of the discussion, you stated you liked the preference idea, and so we included it in the bill draft as such.
Mr. Chairman, just to make sure I understand here, looking at the appropriation on page 6, that's 250,000, and that's for these grants that are not to exceed 50,000 a year, so there'll be at least 5 of those available. And if some of the applications or some of the grants are for less than the 50,000, there could be a couple more. So this is a grant program that's only going to go to certain districts. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, it is $250,000 for a single year. So when that amount is included in their standard budget, that will be $500,000. And my recollection of the conversation as to why it was that amount is it is basically equal to the CTE demonstration project grant under 21-12-105.
Questions or comments from the committee? Yes, go ahead, Happy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One discussion point we've had is how some districts through the model receive their CTE dollars, but don't necessarily allocate them fully to CTE, and just the nature of local control and how those dollars are shifted. So I am concerned that this might be, if we don't narrow that to those districts who have used all their CTE dollars for CTE dollars, that this is a way they can take their CTE dollars, move them to something else, and then say, well, we have this need. So is there a way to tighten that up a little bit as a program application requirement?
Like to respond?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I don't, the preference was one way to do it. I'm fine with, you have to have it expended before you get it. And I think we did it on a 5-year basis because, that can fluctuate on what, they may save for a while. So the issue is you got a small district and they want to buy something, right? And so they have to hoard a little bit of that money over time and then expend it when they got enough money to buy whatever that piece of equipment is. So the idea is we'd look at a 5-year look, but if you had, over that 5-year look, if you hadn't expended your money. So that was the idea.
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like Senator Ellis's idea, and I'm curious if an amendment, I'm going to ask staff if an amendment on page 3, a new subsection 4, would say something along the lines of assurance that block grant funds allocated for CTE have been expended is something that makes sense and is doable.
We haven't moved the motion yet, but I think that's you've got a few minutes to construct an amendment that would do exactly what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think it'd, go on page 3, instead of first preference, shall be given to districts that expend it. It shall, you just say, it shall only be given to districts that expend, and then you go on from there. So I think that's kind of would be the easiest way to put it in.
Does that address your concern, Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that gets closer, but I just looked at the Crew report not long ago, and I just looked at the statewide average. So I am kind of curious if anyone has a list of those districts that are really spending their CT dollars in CTE versus those districts that maybe aren't. So I don't know if anyone has that right now, but I'd be curious to know that.
Might be hard to find. Mr. Co-Chair.
Page 3, what line on that first preference?
Mr. Mr. Chairman, page 3, line 23, into the sentence, you know, you would go in and strike first preference and go on to page 4. You know, you go, you just go, this grant shall be given to districts that have expended. And so that's how I think you'd clean that up. And I still have that 5-year look for those districts that try to squirrel money away to buy a piece of equipment.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the committee? All right, Tanya, thank you. We'll open it up to public comment. Anyone like to comment? We've heard some comments already from CTE folks. Anyone else? Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee?
I'll move the bill.
Okay, bill's been moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Conley. All right, now discussion on the bill. Could
So,
we,
Mr. Chairman, I guess to go to that, I would make a motion on page 3 to do that very thing, to ensure that the districts have expended their money. And so by that, I would strike first preference on page 3, and then insert in that place, and ultimately I'd give latitude to staff, but basically this grant, you know, so strike.
okay, is the amendment clear to everyone? Yes, go ahead. Representative Newsom.
Since we took out first preference, we probably need to take out second preference.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there'd have to be conforming amendments, and that's just a rough amendment.
Okay, any other questions about the proposed amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I want to be following along clearly, but I'm not. So I get the intent, but I'm just not following along and having it clear. And I mean, I don't know if like on page 3, it should be like a criteria. You've got Romanets 1 through 3. I don't know if we add that be a fourth criteria, or if it's better to have tinker in this new created paragraph C. I don't know that it's totally clear to me.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
I guess I don't understand what the amendment, I mean, what you're trying to do. I think the way it's written is fine. I mean, you're gonna give first preference. Now, if you want to shut this down, there's gonna be less grants or whatever, but I think every district's different. And we know nobody's paying the model base salary of 37.5. So it's going somewhere. It's not evaporating. It's not buying Bitcoin with it. They're using it to hire people to run their districts. And so I think by doing this, be careful. You might eliminate the entire grant program. And so I don't know. I think it's written fine the way it is.
So,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I think the language for the amendment that I provided is fine. So you go on page 3 and you strike first preference. Line 23, at the end, you strike first preference, and you insert this grant. And then it would read, this grant shall be given to districts that have expended or will expend with the award of the grant requested under this section, the entire amount generated. And it limits the amount. A preference can do the same thing. I had it drafted as a preference, but certainly would understand if we want to tighten that up to make sure it's only, the idea is for those districts that really, really care a great deal about their CTE programs and are expending the full amount, that we provide a little bit more money for them for materials and supplies to provide a little bit more CTE programming. So that's the idea.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as we read down on page 4 on line 7, then it says second preference shall be given to districts that have not received the grant. So would you strike that in your amendment and just have this available to districts that have expended the funds? And so nobody new can get this grant?
I think, Mr. Co-Chair?
Mr. Chairman, let me see if I can make a suggestion for dealing with that and another problem in the amendment. Mr. Chairman, as I understand the amendment is to strike first preference at the bottom of page 3, and insert this grant. Shall be, then the language shall be given. I think you need the word only on page 4, line 1 after given, so that it's clear that is the limitation. And then you deal with the other one, I think, on page 4, line 7, if you strike the word second, then it says preference shall be given to districts that have not received a grant in this section, so that you get a rotation, a new one. Is that agreeable with the sponsor?
Mr. Chairman, it's almost identical to what staff just handed me. So what they handed with me was on page 3, line 23, strike first preference, go on to page 4 and strike shall be given, and then it goes only, and so it would start with only district, so you strike shall be given to, and then the language would be only, and then you insert only districts that have expended or will expend, and then you go down and on line 7, after the word application, you'd put in application shall be eligible to, I think that's receive funds under this section. And then on line 7, you would strike second, just like the good co-chair said. Line 8, you would add a capital P and start the sentence with preference shall be given to districts. So yes, the idea is to share this grant around to different districts, so it's not always the same district getting it, as provided they're using their money. So that would be the amendment.
Everybody understand the amendment?
I don't know that there's been a second, but that's it now.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I think that it's kind of a friendly amendment to what we started with anyway, isn't it? Pretty much. I mean,
Yeah. I don't know if we ever had
we're a little out of parliamentary procedure order, but I think the intent is what counts, so we'll proceed with that. All right, any other comments or questions on the amendment?
Mr.
Everyone
Chairman, the
understand it?
amendment is the whole amendment.
Yes.
As modified.
Yes, as modified, yes.
Okay.
Okay? Yes, go ahead. Hey, anything else on the amendment? All right, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no? The amendment is carried. Now back on the bill.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The reason I brought this is CTE continues to be an expanding need in the state of Wyoming, and I think over the course of the interim, we've heard testimony from individuals, and particularly Mr. Hill and others, that are we expending the money that we want to expend? Is that enough money? And so the idea here is a kind of a carrot thing, and for those districts that really value their CTE programs and are not using it for other things, that they be given the opportunity to apply for a grant for supplies and materials, which are some of the most expensive pieces of the CTE programs. And so that was the idea, was just to give a boost to those districts that really value CTE programs.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. So the only question or concern I have, which I don't know the real answer to, but I pulled up the CREW report because I was curious where different districts were at. And what I see, for example, is my district, Albany County, for 2021, actually expended 0% of their vocational education supplies and equipment budget towards apparently that. That's not how things went. That didn't happen. And in fact, we, through enhancements at our high school, we have, I can't even tell you how many dollars of commitment to vocational education that the district took on in excess of our budget. So I like the idea, but I know my district's not eligible based on the CREW report and the amendment we just passed. I don't know why, but I can just see that it might be a little bit broken. But that's not a reason to be against the bill. That's just me wondering if our data is going to align with the intent particularly well, because I know my district does a pretty good job with CTE courses and career programs, particularly at the high school.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think that's why, later on in the bill, we have a section to try to study what the actual expenses are to get a better handle on what is the expenditure. So I believe, let's see, I can't remember where that's at. Oh, yeah, page 6, line 21, section 4. It gives the Data Advisory Committee the task of working with the state superintendent to better clarify those and identify those expenditures. So that's part of it, is to try to understand better what those expenditures are.
I'll just note that good Representative Summers' district is hitting about 12.5%. So I think we've got some concern on the data. I think that's going to be valuable. Thanks.
Anyone else? Yes.
Just Representative Connolly was asking this, do any use all? And yes, the numbers, the highest I see on the CREW report for 2021 was a district using 180%. So it varies from 0 to almost 200%. And as Representative Summers noted, it certainly varies significantly year by year for any given school district as well. So the data is interesting.
Well, speaking from my experience many decades ago, it's really hard to project how things are going to go during a school year. So when it comes budget time and you turn in your budget as a CTE teacher, you really have no idea how many kids you're going to have this next year and how aggressive those kids are from a standpoint of an ag teacher that had a very active shop program. Some of those kids come in there and they want to build a horse trailer, and the next year they don't want to do anything. And so you're just all over the place on trying to, and that's really hard for business managers to understand sometimes, is that, it's almost impossible to predict what you're going to need, especially in the way of materials. The equipment thing is pretty well cut and dried and all that. And of course you have to share those across all the CTE programs too. And so there's a bit of a competition within each school as to who gets what, whether the family and consumer science gets it, or the business program gets it, or what. So you kind of have to work together on the expensive pieces of equipment to work with your fellow teachers to decide who gets preference on buying equipment and so forth. But material things is that's the real hard part to try to predict and to get some kind of a handle on. It's just, I think that would be substantiated by our CTE folks that are sitting in the back there nodding. So I'm on and in support of the bill. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this too. I'm like CTE and all that it provides, but we're starting to see a new trend where we want to direct dollars that we already are allocating money for in the model, but we're looking at what's happening and how those dollars are being spent, and those dollars aren't reaching those targeted areas we want. So now our workaround is to come up with grants to try and supplement that and direct those funds. And so, we've been talking a lot about early literacy. That's important to me. Do we start a new grant program to say more, smaller classroom sizes or classroom ratios? We want these dollars to go to early literacy teachers. I just urge us some caution, but I think that all of this is coming from a place where we think dollars, we want to start targeting those dollars. And that really conflicts with this block grant model, local control thing that we've been talking about for a lot of years. So I support this bill, but I think we're heading down an interesting path. And so if we keep doing these grant programs, all of a sudden we'll be supplanting our model with these very types of grant programs. So just a word of caution.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Ellis just explained exactly why I'm against the bill. And I was against the mental health thing. It's to that point. When I first came in the legislature, we were taught the gospel is the funding model is evidence-based. Don't question the model, fully fund the model, and let the districts decide. And here we are, I'm on my second term here shortly, and we're supplementing the model. We're dumping more money into this bucket, because the model's falling short. We've got to re-examine this funding model stuff, and I just don't think this avenue is the way to go, so I'm going to be against this bill.
Representative Obermueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to roll back to the memo that's, that preceded this bill. I have a question about the dollars that are discussed there. Maybe it's a question for
WDE folks?
Yes, it is.
Okay, could we have WDE folks come forward again, please?
Mr. Chairman, page 3. Could you just talk to us about the makeup of that $24 million in district expenditures? The asterisk indicates that it's combined with some other things in this function code 1530, but I just don't understand really what it's saying. If you could just flesh out that basically $25 million that's reported as an expenditure under CTE resources.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermueller, you bet. So that 24.9 million that you see there in Table 1, that represents everything that school districts reported under this function code 1530, which is intended to capture all CTE expenditures. The reason that number is so much larger than the number above it is because that number above it is only the additional funding in the model for CTE. So remember that there are minimum teachers, the regular 7-to-1, 16-to-1 funding ratios for teachers. There's money in the block grant that can support CTE along with any other content area. But all that we can pull out of the model in terms of funding for CTE is that additional piece. So districts are spending more than the additional amount for CTE. We just don't have an apples-to-apples comparison there. But that 1530 function code is intended to be only CTE expenditures.
Follow up?
No, I don't think there's a follow-up. I just wanted to make sure that 24 was all going to CTE and wasn't a combination with other items. So good question answered. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, that's why I was opposed to this amendment. I think the reporting thing, it's not perfect. I mean, it's based on district personnel that input expenses. We know that it's not perfect, and even though we do the best we can, but I think part of this whole struggle that Senator Ellis pointed out is, and I think the committee's gone a long way with passing ECA. We're underfunding $90 million. We know that. I mean, the last 10 years, we've been just slowly hanging on, and we've done what we've had to do. We've struggled. I mean, we've been in a serious financial deal for 6-7 years now, and so, and maybe we're coming out of some of that. And I think the committee is, our proposal on the ECA is a huge step forward for to say that some districts don't support, or nobody's really said that, but to put an emphasis or a thought out there that districts don't support CTE. My goodness. I mean, it's come to my district. Some of you have, you've seen the facilities we've done. It's incredible. And the work and the emphasis. In fact, today's a career day at our district. So I think we're just struggling because we're underfunded and people are coming to us and we're trying to do the best we can. But if the CCA makes it through, it's going to be a huge help all the way through this. So as the session begins and we go down this road, our leadership with our colleagues is going to be really important. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a little follow-up then on the discussion we're having on the 24 million. Senator Rolfes said that, in the financial information he was looking at, there was a zero. So are there more dollars being spent in this area than the 24 million indicates? Or, what is this a combination of if some are reporting zero?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Mueller, we would have to look into that specific example. I believe there were some federal expenditures reported for that year, for that district, but the 24, just under $25 million number there represents the amount of general fund expenditures reported by school districts under that function code 1530, which is specific to CTE. So there could be federal expenditures. Of course, that number does not include any federal expenditures. That number that you see in the next column includes those federal Perkins dollars, and then also those CTE demo grants would be one additional amount. Does that answer your question, sir?
Okay. Yes. LSO wants to weigh in.
Yeah,
here.
and Mr. Chairman and Representative Overmueller, there's a large discrepancy here because the amount in the 6.2 million amount is the additional amount in the block grant funding model. So the additional CTE teacher FTEs and the additional CTE supplies materials represents the $6.2 million. The 25 million in the row below includes, and I think Mr. Carroll's indicated this in his footnote, the total expenditures that the districts have reported for all of their personnel and all of their supplies, materials, and other items for under that 1530 code. The block grant model resources career technical education teachers within the specialist teachers category, but that's not disaggregated as a specific line item in the block grant. The additional CTE amount is, and so that's why there's such a discrepancy in the two amounts. Is that we're kind of blending components in that $25 million amount. We're only extrapolating a small portion of the block grant model in that $6.2 million amount. I hope that provides some clarity. Maybe not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matt, I guess my follow-up question dealt with the $24 million number, whether that was actually aggregating all of the expenses from everybody when Senator Rolfes had said that there was a reporting of zero coming out of his district.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, and to Senator Rolfes's example is that it's only isolated on the supplies and materials expenditures in the general fund for CTE. We can investigate and follow up with the committee that they may have expended dollars in their special revenue fund, which is not accounted for in the crew report. And so, we can provide all the details for those districts that have zero expenditures for a certain school year. But it also gets to the reason in the bill. I think Representative Summers has, the average over 5 years. A school district may receive a portion of its block grant dollars and they want to save those for a larger purchase over a couple years to make that, a purchase of a welder as an example. And so they may not expend anything 1 year. And they may just expend federal Perkins dollars rather than their block grant dollars. And so you may see some fluctuations on an annual basis between districts' block grant dollars as compared to what they've been allocated.
Yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I disturbed by one remark I heard that essentially, as I understood it, maybe I misunderstood it, said that our funding on education was, we were underfunding education. Frankly, I cannot agree with that. We were, when we were doing the recalibration 2 years ago, Senate Education Committee came up with a proposed bill that passed the Senate that would have reduced the expenditures by about 8.5%, as I remember. And I may not be remembering the figures exactly. And that all came to grief when the feds passed that big stimulus bill where we were going to lose close to 300 million if we didn't have maintenance of effort. And there was a dispute on how to handle that. And a good deal of uncertainty in how to handle that because the feds had more strings than they were willing to explain or able to explain at that point. So I don't think that the case is made that we're underfunding this. In general, there has been inflation, significant inflation since that time. So it's not perhaps the level that we talked about 2 years ago. But I just want to say I am not persuaded that we are underfunding K-12 education.
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, we just passed an amendment that I think was a reasonable amendment if the data were good. And the fact that it's not leads me to reconsider that vote on the amendment, because I think looking at just kind of eyeballing the spreadsheet that I sent around to everybody, probably only 5 districts will be eligible. It seems like the original language provided flexibility where any district would be eligible, but you give preference based on expenditures, and it would be easy to just move for reconsideration of that vote if others feel the same way. I'd like to reverse that amendment, and I don't know what others think, but I'd make that motion if others agree.
Okay, we have a motion to reconsider the amendment. I don't think that's debatable, is it? If I remember right? Okay. So, thank you. All in favor of reversing the amendment that we passed earlier?
Yeah, the first would be a vote for reconsideration, so all in favor of reconsideration. That would be the
Okay.
first. And then
That's
if
right.
there is
You're right.
reconsideration, then we would revote.
You're right. Okay, so the first vote is for reconsideration. I think, does that require 2/3 majority or, okay, simple majority. All in favor of reconsideration of the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed? 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like did you get the same count I did, 5 to 6 then?
At the first, on the first for reconsideration.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right, so now that we're up for reconsideration of the amendment, I think that's not debatable either, if I remember right. And so, all in favor of the original amendment signify by raising your hand. What? We're voting on, we voted to reconsider the motion, and that passed, so we are reconsidering it. And now we have an opportunity to if we vote aye, that means the amendment stays. If we vote no, then the amendment fails. Okay, is that clear? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, does the motion to reconsider require 2/3 majority vote of the committee? No?
As far as I know, just simple majority, yeah. All right, so are we clear on what we're voting on? An aye vote means that the amendment passes the way it was originally drafted. A no vote means that we defeat the motion, or the amendment, okay? So all in favor of retaining, I guess, the amendment, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All in favor of, or all opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it looks like to me. So the amendment is now dead.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to explain my vote on the bill. I'm going to vote no on the bill now. I'm afraid without the amendment, what the bill does is essentially say that go ahead and switch money out of CTE to expend elsewhere for whatever reason, and I have problems with what I think they're doing with it. And we'll get a grant to make up the difference. And I think we're starting down a slippery slope of eroding the meaning of the block grant and just trying to ratchet everything upwards. So I think it's less a vote on the specifics of the CTE and some of the problems there, and more a vote on overall district expenditures. So I was going to vote aye on the bill, and I'm now going to vote no.
Okay. Further comments? Yes, Senator Office.
I just asked the chairman if he has any other amendments that work. I mean, it wasn't the concept of the amendment that was the problem. It was the fact that the function of the amendment failed to achieve the concept of the amendment. If you don't, Mr. Chairman, like the bill at this point in time, because you want the concept there, is there an alternative solution that you can think of that achieves the objective rather than just making the bill entirely ineffectual?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
not at this point.
Okay,
Question.
question is called. Roll call on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, on 23 LSO-0248, School Finance, Career and Technical Education Grants, Senator Beitman. Senator Ellis. Senator Rothfuss. Senator Salazar. Representative Andrew. Representative Brown left a vote of aye. Representative Connolly. Representative Harshman. Representative Nyman.
No.
Representative Newsom. Representative Obermuller. Representative Summers.
Aye.
Co-Chairman Scott.
No.
Chairman Paxton.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 8 ayes and 6 noes.
Okay, so the bill moves forward. It looks like we are ahead of schedule. And let's see. Let me find the right page here. I guess we have a decision to make if we want to move forward with in that first bill after lunch, dealing with charter schools. I'm thinking that there might be some folks, especially online and so forth, that would be interested in weighing in on this. I'm not sure that we should continue without, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Would it make sense to have the reporting on the Wyoming Teacher Apprentice Program since there is no legislation attached to that?
If the appropriate people are here, we could maybe do that. That's what I thought, that Laurel wasn't here.
Mr. Chairman, we could walk the bill too, if that would be your pleasure. We could walk the bill and take comment afterwards.
Just walk through it and then take it up without a vote after lunch? Okay. That sound agreeable to the rest of you? Okay, let's do that.
Mr. Chairman, back again for 23 LSO 246 Charter School Amendments, Working Draft 5. This is a bill from the committee that was requested at the September meeting to address a number of issues identified by the State Department of Education in relation to the operation of the charter school statutes after the amendments in the 2021 section. I'll just dive right in. Page 1, line 11 through page 2, line 22. Creates 21-3-315. This authorizes charter schools to be treated as a local education agency to apply for state and federal grants that they may be eligible for. The language is very similar to the language contained in the BOCES bill that Ms. Hanson discussed previously. Subsection B on lines 13 through 16 requires the Department of Education to treat charter schools as an LEA if the charter school elects such a designation. Lines 18 through 22 provides that the charter schools that elect to operate as an LEA are responsible for complying with the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act for those students that are enrolled in the charter school. Section 2 amends existing statute, page 3, line 1 through page 7, line 2. On lines 5 through 16, this amends 21-3-307A Romanet 19. In accordance with Department of Education guidance to clarify that in reference to legal liability and insurance cover, that insurance coverage, that the application is required to include a proposed agreement or a summary of the proposed agreement between the authorizer and the charter school, and if applicable, the district. On to subsection D on lines 18 through 23 and page 4.
Chairman? Go ahead. Mr. Chairman, that change on A, that last one, starting on lines 12 through 16 on page 3, explain what the result of that change does. What do, yeah. Oops. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I think the concern expressed by the Department of Education, and they can certainly weigh in on this, was that it required an agreement, and this requires a proposed agreement. And perhaps when they're doing their application process, they didn't have the information necessary to submit an agreement between the parties, but a proposed agreement was something they could submit.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think it's the kind of a chicken and egg situation here when the authorization for a new charter school isn't given, but in the application process, they're required to have insurance coverage agreement. And so I think the premise is that they wanted to have that proposed agreement when the authorizer was going to make its recommendation to approve or deny. I think that's the recommendation from the department.
Follow up? Okay, all right.
Moving on, page 3, lines 18 through page 4, lines 12. This amends subsection D to eliminate the reference to 21-3-310 because it was repealed in the 2021 comprehensive charter school legislation modifications. Page 4, line 14 through page 5, line 3. This amends 21-3-313 in accordance with Department of Education guidance that requires each charter school to report to the state board as opposed to the authorizer with regard to their progress in advancing those purposes as specified in 21-3-301, which includes such items as improving learning, increasing learning opportunities, different or innovative teaching, or new professional opportunities for teachers and expanded educational options. In addition, those charter schools will be required to report on the impact of any waivers that are granted by the State Board of Education or the district. And the substance of that portion of the amendment can be found on lines 21 through 23 on page 4 and lines 1 through 3 on page 5. Page 5, line 5 through page 7, line 2 amends 21-3-314. This is the statute governing the funding for charter schools, and it garnered a lot of discussion at the last committee meeting. And in the amendments to subsection C on lines 8 through page 6, line 5, this is the provision that governs the baseline assumptions, sort of the negotiating positions between the district and the charter school when they sit down to try to talk about how the funds are going to be allocated. And so on line 21 and 22, you'll note that this provision has been modified to eliminate the reference to special education and transportation. Recall at the last committee meeting, the direction was to ensure that charter schools are entitled to those funds. And so that language on the bottom of page 5, lines 21 and 22, when coupled with lines 1 through 5, authorizes the committee's directive on that particular piece. Subsection F, which is found on page 6, line 7 through page 7, line 2, this provision governs in the event that the charter school in the district or the full-time virtual charter school in the district are unable to reach an agreement with the school district. And the language mirrors that language on lines 1 through 5, on lines 20 through 22, and on to page 7, lines 1 and 2, which provides that the charter school is entitled to 100% of the amount expended by the charter school that is eligible for reimbursement under 2113-320 and 2113-321, which are the special education and transportation statutes.
Go ahead, Senator.
So Tanya, just to clarify then, my understanding of these last couple pages is that it only changes things for transportation and special education. Whether there's a negotiation or not, it would be 100% reimbursement for transportation as we do for public schools, and 100% reimbursement for special education under any circumstance. And then the negotiation would only cover the rest of the categories. Is that accurate, or would anything change for what I'll call the rest of the categories?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, so under subsection C, those provisions are revenue assumptions, revenue assumptions. So if you look on page 5, line 13, this is essentially the beginning negotiating position for the parties. And so, in any event, they could come to some other agreement. Perhaps they could get 110% of the cost or something along those lines.
Mr. Chairman, quick follow-up. Okay, so what you're saying is that that then is the starting point subject to negotiation, and in the absence of a negotiation, both of those two categories would go to 100%, where the other categories, I believe, were at 80% by statute. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Office, I think the amendment to subsection C, paragraph 1 on page 5, that includes, that amendment does not include transportation or special education as part of the revenue assumptions. Meaning, if the charter school expends eligible dollars for those reimbursements, they're entitled to those regardless of the negotiating position. Those aren't included in the revenue assumptions. Subsection F is in the instance that they cannot reach an agreement under subsection C, or if the charter school is a full-time charter school.
And I would add this as well as a follow-up. Under prior law, under existing law, they were not entitled to that assumption for special education and transportation. There were a number of categories, there are 5, I think, that were sort of carved out from any sort of discussion about negotiating, between 1 and whatever, 10.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, just on the 80%, so the 80% still, if there's negotiation fails, then it's still the 80% rule on the block grant. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, it's 80% under the block grant resources. But with this amendment on page 6 and then going on to page 7, that new paragraph 4 still allows for 100% of the expenditures by the charter school for transportation and special ed to be still reimbursed. And I think that's a very nuanced piece of this legislation, is that those expenditures have to be borne by the charter school, not the district. Recall, I mean, these charter schools are part of the district, regardless of who the authorizer is. And the charter school under these new paragraphs would have to expend those dollars, not the district. So if the district is still hiring the bus driver and has the bus, those expenditures are by the district, not the charter school. So, you know, the bus driver would have to be employed by the charter school, not the district. There's a distinction in that. And I don't know, that may be lost in this discussion, but I want to make that point, that the charter school shall be entitled to the amount that the expended by the charter school, not the district. And, a district may hire a speech pathologist that services the charter school. That expenditure is not borne by the charter school, it's borne by the district. And so I just want to make sure that that nuance is not lost on this bill.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I need that explained all over again. So let's just say, so the charter school, let's say the charter school does have a transportation cost, whatever that transportation cost is. It takes a student to wherever. So does the charter school get the money and the district doesn't get the money, even though the district's paying the bill? How does that work? Who pays the bill? Who gets the money?
I mean, some of those nuances about who's applying, there's no mechanism for a charter school to apply directly to the Department of Education for transportation reimbursement. But under the law, if the charter school spent the money and it's eligible for reimbursement under 21, 13, 320, or 321, then they're entitled to that money. And so even if the district came, or the payment came to the district, which is the way it works, there's no direct payment to a charter school from the school foundation program account. And this bill doesn't contemplate that. It contemplates it being treated as a public school, which it is. And then, this is under subsection C, this is the negotiating position for those that are authorized by school districts. Subsection F, if you look at line 8, this applies to charter schools or full-time virtual charter schools authorized by the SLIB. And so this is in the instance that they can't come to an agreement with the district. Obviously, they're not authorized by the district, and perhaps their relationship wouldn't be the same as if they were approved by the district. And in that instance, they are entitled to the 100% in addition to the 80% or the 65% if it's a virtual school.
In this case, the charter school under F, if they're providing that service, in other words, they are the ones doing the transportation, then they get reimbursed 100% for that. I just want to be clear. I want to understand whether is somebody providing the service and not getting their money back? Is there a possibility of that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, not under the terms of the bill. Now, how this will actually be administered by school districts in their relationship with charter schools, we certainly can't speak to that. But under this provision, no. If the charter school is expending funds that are eligible for reimbursement, and recall there are rules and statutes that govern what that is, but they would be entitled to the money associated with that, just as they would be as any other public school.
Representative Connolly, I believe, do you still have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Asked and answered.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, so I want to be just absolutely clear here. The special education, 2113-321, the charter school has to provide special education. They have a student that needs it. This would allow them to be reimbursed 100%, same as any other public school. Mr. Chairman, I would suggest to the committee that with regard to special education, I think that to comply with the Campbell decisions, we need to pass this particular provision. I have a little more reservation about that the transportation is less clearly defined as to what's needed and what isn't, and would be potential for being abused, and we might want to consider that one, Mr. Chairman, as we go forward. But I think the special education, we get in trouble with if we don't pass this. LSO, am I missing something in this, that we need this in order for those kids to get that special education service and get reimbursed? Then the school district, thus the charter school get reimbursed for it.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, the district is responsible for, finding the children and providing services, and certainly the school as a public school plays its role as well. But when you think about it in the context of other public schools, these charter schools are no different than another public school. And so, in your example, certainly we are required to service the special education population. Whether that is through the district or whether it's through the school, hopefully it's a collaborative process. And this bill now includes a provision in the event that they elect to be an LEA. It specifies they are for sure responsible for providing those services required as a local education agency. But I think that's an important point. These charter schools are public schools within a school district, similar to any other public school.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this bill create latitude for these schools that other public schools don't have?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, it is a different dynamic, certainly, when you're commanding that payment be made in the event that an agreement cannot be reached. So in that instance, it's a different dynamic. So yes, I don't know that schools go to their district and demand payment for special education services, because those services, special education, transportation, and the other items listed that were carved out are district level services. They're contemplated at a district level. A bus isn't necessarily designated to Hobbs Elementary. It's designated to Laramie County School District number 1 and may run for Hobbs and Central and McCormick and athletic events. So in that way, it is different.
Okay. Follow up, you all right? Okay, yes. Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, so just thinking back to our last meeting, and I think we were all kind of stunned at the $15 million price tag. And that's really for the double funding that we didn't realize, I guess, when we voted on the bill. It'd been so long since we'd really looked at this issue. But nothing in this bill addresses any of that, and only actually adds to that 15 million, potentially.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, the estimate is about 13.9. I just want to make sure we're.
Okay, 14 million.
Sorry.
Thank you.
And, that is those are based on our assumptions based upon projected enrollments that have been provided to the State Loan and Investment Board. We assumed for the charter schools in Laramie County School District number 1 and Natrona County School District number 1 that 50% of those students would be new to the district. And then the charter school approved in Platte County School District number 1, we assumed 10% would be new to the district. And how that, recall how it works is the charter school enrollment for the first year of operation is doubled. And that may not necessarily be double funding, but the enrollment is double. Because, the model's nuances of minimum teachers and so forth, there are just some nuances. So I just want to make sure that we're talking apples to apples. The enrollment is doubled, not necessarily the funding. And that is only for the first year of the charter school operation. The second and the third year, those enrollments are adjusted by the actual enrollments from October. And so they may have a decrease or they may have an increase. And so I hope that provides some clarification.
So, Mr. Chairman, this bill does nothing on those parts, on the doubling count of the enrollment. Just to be clear, this is only adding more guarantees of funding with sped and transportation.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, it does not address the double enrollment, but I don't know that it's going to increase costs. Whatever transportation or special education services is required by this population, they would receive that as a public school student. It just changes sort of who gets the money at the end of the day based on who expends it, but the requirements of statute for reimbursement of special education and transportation and the Department of Education's rules and regulations that govern those components apply to these just as they would any other public school.
So, Mr. Chairman, then why do we need the bill?
Because in the event that there's a disagreement between the charter school and the district, there's no mechanism for them to say, we are entitled to those funds for those schools that are approved by the SLIB. And then under subsection C, those costs were specifically excluded from the negotiation between the school district and the charter school.
Which, Mr. Chairman, I mean, really, why shouldn't they be excluded? Why should we include them?
Mr. Chairman, that's a policy choice
Yeah.
for you all to make.
Thank you.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So that issue of doubling the ADM, I mean, we could put that in this bill, right? I mean, we could do an amendment. It's charter school amendments. So if in fact we wanted to change that double ADM for the first year, we could in fact do that, right? I mean, you'd have to change the title a bit, but I think it's within what the discussion we've had.
Mr.
fair?
Chairman, Representative Summers, certainly this bill hasn't been introduced. You could put whatever you like in this bill, so
thank
long
you.
as it's a single subject.
Mr. Co-Chair?
Yeah, I'm continuing to be confused on this special ed. If we don't pass the bill and there's a disagreement between the school district and the charter school, and then the charter school is obliged to provide special ed services for some student they've got. If we don't pass this bill, it seems to me they don't get reimbursed, and there's a problem there. And you have an incentive for the school to hold down the services to special ed, and I think the Campbell decisions tried to erase that problem. So I think in order for the charter school to get paid for what they spend on the special ed, we've got to pass this bill. Is that a correct understanding?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, I would say at the highest level, the state is responsible for providing special education. And so you have sort of given that authority to the districts, and the districts do it with the cooperation of the schools. And this authorizes a mechanism for them to receive payment in the instance that an agreement cannot be reached if the charter school is approved by the SLIB for special education and transportation.
Mr. Chairman, let me try to take a stab at this. Right now, any charter school, whether they're authorized by the SLIB or a district, the district is responsible for providing those special education services, regardless of whether regardless whoever the authorizer is. The district is responsible, and ultimately the state. This bill does two things. The first is it allows a charter school to be designated as a local education agency, which relieves the responsibility of the district to provide those special education services, and allows the charter school to be held responsible. But ultimately, the state will be held responsible. Second, if the charter school makes expenditures related to special education they will be reimbursed directly for those expenditures. Under the current law, districts are responsible for special education. They make the expenditures, they get reimbursed. It's a policy choice whether or not you want to allow charter schools to be designated as an LEA and be held responsible for special education.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I'm beginning to understand. It therefore looks to me like that if we don't pass this bill, the district, you have a student that needs special ed. The district can come in and give that special ed to the student in the charter school. And I suppose if it's, say speech therapy or something like that, it wouldn't make any difference. But if the problem is the student is having difficulty reading, the district would come in and do that instruction in a way that could very well be inconsistent with the general approach the charter school has to a reading program. So what we're doing, we don't pass the bill, is threatening to undermine what we're trying to achieve with the charter school, because they will be likely using, and I'll pick reading as an example, they'll likely be using a different system to teach reading. And you're going to make it very difficult for them to include those special ed kids in that kind of instruction.
Comments from LSO? I think, to me, either way, the special ed kids and the transportation things are going to be reimbursed. It's just a matter of the mechanism of whether or not it comes through the school district or comes through the charter school. Is that more accurate? But it's not going to affect a special ed kid receiving services one way or the other.
Mr. Chairman, these are public schools. These charter schools are public schools that operate within the constraints of the district to some extent. And so the district and the school are responsible for these kids. Perhaps the school districts in the audience are able to answer more directly about the practical effects and how they cooperate with each other to provide these services, to respond to Chairman Scott's questions. But we don't have the expertise to give an answer about the practicalities of delivering special education in a school district.
Well, my plan is to handle only the questions from the committee right now, and then after lunch we'll get public comment, and that may clear up some of the information that it might help clear it up. So for now, let's just proceed and see where we go.
Thanks. So as we're contemplating this, the one consideration that I can potentially see if an individual charter school is granted authority to be an LEA for special education purposes, it's almost like they become a mini district at that point from a resource standpoint, and they can resource separately and they can effectively bill separately. And so I'm wondering if that would lead to potential additionally higher costs if they have to hire on their own special education staff. Again, we don't have a resource model for this, but I think we have department guidance, if I'm not mistaken, on what is and isn't acceptable expenditures. And I guess I don't know that deep enough to know if it's likely to lead to increased costs by having a charter school become an LEA for IDEA purposes. Any thoughts?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, specifically to special education, the Department of Education is required to have staffing guidelines. And they're just guidelines. Doesn't mean that they will not reimburse if a district exceeds those guidelines. So there's a possibility that a charter school, if they are designated as an LEA, will have some staffing increases, perhaps just to do paperwork or the administration of the program that they're now responsible for, that the district already has economies of scales for. But, you know, again, that's a policy choice that you have before you.
Okay, continue.
Mr. Chairman, continuing on with the bill, page 7, lines 4 through 14 contains a staff comment. This references the bill that we'll discuss later today, 23 LSO 304. This just notes that there'll a technical amendment to the language on lines 1 through 5, as well as lines 20 through 22 on page 6, and on to lines 1 and 2 on page 7. Will be required if that bill passes. It's basically just something to alert staff and LSO that might change a little bit if the special education component is pulled out of the education resource block grant model as contemplated by 304. Line 17 on page 7, this repeals 21.3.314C Romanet 3. This referenced a statute 21-3-313C, which was repealed in the 2021 session. So this is a conforming amendment or a reviser's bill, if you will. The language of that repeal can be found on the bottom of page 7, lines 36 through 38, and on lines 1 and 2 on page 8. Pursuant to section 4 on page 8, lines 20 through 25, this bill is effective immediately. Subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any further questions from the committee? All right, I think we'll hold public comment until after lunch, and might be an appropriate time to recess for lunch. So we'll be back at 1 o'clock.